Chapter 11, Accountability and Ethics, Part 2. We were talking about internal control mechanisms. If we look more specifically at internal checks, we can see that there are different stages where internal checks can be helpful. So as we discussed much earlier in the course when we were covering how you become a police officer, we have pre-employment checks. And so this includes such things as screening, background checks. And so we're going to go and we're going to interview your references. And then what they're going to do before they hire you is they're going to ask those references for the names of other people, and they're going to go interview them as well, and so on and so forth. So it's not just the people that you say, hey, they'll give me a good recommendation, but it's also other people who may be living down the street from you, and you really don't want the police department to talk to them. But nonetheless, the investigators, background investigators, may talk to that person and find out that you were a pretty bad kid, you vandalized their house, whatever. And so the screening and the background checks could be interviewing your references, but it also includes doing criminal background checks, screening you, asking you during the interview process about your ethics, all kinds of things like that. So during the interview process, we could have different internal checks. We can also have academy integrity training, and what I mean by that is that we have the police academy instructors teaching you about ethics and giving you examples of integrity and how you should handle particular incidents. So maybe it's such things as when we were talking about corruption, you see another officer take some money illegally from a drug dealer. What do you do? And so academy integrity training, even before you become a police officer, we should make integrity training part of the academy. So not just teaching you how to shoot, teaching you how to defend yourself, how to fill out an arrest report, those things, but we should be including ethical training at the academy. We also can have academy integrity checks. And what an integrity check is essentially a proactive way of checking out to see whether someone is honest or not. So we could do things in the academy that the cadet doesn't know that he or she is being tested, but someone can come up and maybe offer them the answers to a test. And so will they take it or not? Or will they refuse it? And show that they're honest. Will they take the answers and cheat? Or will they be honest and maybe report the person who offered it to them? So these can be done during the academy as well to make sure this person knows we're watching them, and if they do engage in dishonest behavior, then we can get rid of them in the academy before they become a police officer if their misconduct is bad enough. On the job, we can have a variety of different on-the-job internal checks. So we can continue to give integrity training while they're on the job, continue to bring in experts on ethics and talk to the police officers. We can have clear policies so they know better what to do in a particular situation. What do we expect of them? Do we expect that they're going to violate people's rights, or is it a strict policy that no, we obey the Constitution? So these kinds of things can be set out in policies. Integrity checks can be done while the officer is on the job. This is often done with vice units. So units, for instance, like the narcotics unit. So we might want to check them out just to see if they are bad. And so we'll have undercover police officers actually go in and try to test the fellow police officers to see if they'll take money, if they'll take drugs, if they'll do whatever. And so this is an integrity check that we can do when the police officers are on the job. They are police officers. Now, Obviously, this can help us to identify bad officers, but it also can serve as a deterrent, because if those officers know that the department does integrity checks, then when a drug dealer offers them money, then they might turn it down because they don't know, is this really a drug dealer or is this an undercover police officer who's testing me out and I'm going to go to jail if I take this money. So integrity checks can be helpful for deterrence as well. We mentioned already early warning, early identification. So that can be a useful tool as part of our internal check system. Body cams and cruiser cams, we already said that these can provide evidence of what actually happened. They're not perfect. They don't capture everything, but they capture a lot more than nothing, obviously. And so they often are very helpful. And in fact, many of the police officers I've talked to about cruiser cams and body cams said that while there was resistance to them when they first were installed, that they've actually come to view them as a positive thing because they tend to clear more officers than condemn them. So they tend to be very helpful when a citizen makes a false complaint against a police officer. And finally, another internal check for on the job once you become a police officer would be just general supervision. Do the supervisors actually know their subordinates? Are they close to them? Are they not only hearing complaints or lack of complaints against officers, but they know what's really going on in the street? They have a good idea whether this officer is a good officer or a bad officer. And if they look like they're a bad officer, can we correct them? Can we retrain them? Can we convince them to be a good officer? Now, one of the ways that we can ensure that a police department is up to standards and is exercising good ethical behavior is to really move it towards the status of profession. So profession, we sometimes use that loosely and we say, any job is a profession, but that's not really true. Professions are special in some sense, and if anyone out there is a business major, you could probably deliver this lecture much better than I can. But there are certain characteristics of a profession. One is autonomy, meaning that they're able to make decisions on their own. So we wouldn't likely call someone who's working on an assembly line who spends all day long putting widgets onto devices as a professional, because they don't have much autonomy. They can't decide, well, on this widget I'm going to put, or on this device I'm going to put a widget, on this next device I'm not going to put a widget. They can do that, but they're probably going to get fired after a while because they're not doing their job. But they don't have a lot of autonomy. Police officers do. They have a lot of decision-making power without a whole lot of supervision. So there's very much decentralization of authority, meaning that even if we're in a traditional police department, the police officers, individual officers, still have a lot of control over what they do on the job. If we move into a more innovative or quality management style police department, then we see even more decentralization of authority. Power doesn't just reside in the people at the top. It is measured out in various amounts to people throughout the entire system. So the line level patrol officer still has a lot of decision-making power. So authority, power has been decentralized. And as I said, the members have decision-making power. The second characteristic of a profession is a unique body of knowledge. And that's certainly true for police officers. They know how to apply the criminal law. They know how to do a bunch of other practices. Maybe they're tactical actions, such as how do you actually, what should you actually do in a school shooting? What should you do when you want to serve a no-knock warrant? All of these kinds of things. So they have this unique body of knowledge that the general public doesn't have, and that helps to set them apart. So they have expertise through studying experts, consulting, modeling, and scientific research. So through experts, by studying them, by getting the benefit of consulting companies that may come in, and talk to the police department about how to improve their practices through modeling, through looking at other police officers and seeing what the good officers do and mimicking those officers, and through scientific research. So, we actually have a better understanding of what the police do. So it's social science, social scientific research, but it's still scientific research about what the police do and don't do. So through these things, we could develop a unique body of knowledge. Typically, people in a profession have special levels of education and training. So maybe it's formal education like college, but the training is obviously something that police officers are going to have to complete these days. So, if you're talking about police, they're going to go through an academy. If you were talking about the profession of practicing law, you've gone through law school, and you've continued to train once you're on the job as well. Certification and accreditation, we talked about this in the previous PowerPoint presentation. So certification and accreditation, we want to get basically a stamp of approval saying we have met the requirements of the profession. We are up to the level of professional responsibility that's demanded by the profession. So is there a form of certification and accreditation? Now this could be for departments, but it could also be for individual police officers. You're going to have to get certified as a sworn police officer, meaning you have completed academy training. So that could be at a private academy, it could be at an academy that your police department owns. But you are now certified as a sworn police officer, and so you can make arrests, you can carry a sidearm, a handgun, you can do a variety of different things. So it can be certification and accreditation for the entire department, or it could just be for particular individual officers. So certification of members, and again, groups like CALEA are important today to conduct that certification and accreditation. The ethical perspectives of officers. So as we go through and try to figure out how do we get police officers to act ethically, well, we've just gone over internal accountability mechanisms. We just went over some aspects of a profession. We try to professionalize the police. So we expect that they're going to be held to a higher standard if they're professionals. But we can also look at the individual ethical perspectives of officers, because this may give us an idea of why they do what they do. So there are basically three types. One is ethical formalism. And what this perspective basically entails is the officer saying, I go by the book. When I can deal with something on the streets, I consult the book, what they mean by the book is the policy manual, maybe the training that was done by field training officers, or what they learned in the academy, but that's their book. So they don't see grays, they just see black or white. And so the ethical formalist is probably the easiest to understand, because if you understand what the rules are that govern the situation, that's what they're going to apply. Ethical utilitarianism, now we start to get a little bit more complicated, because here this person is really acting subjectively, because they're saying, I am doing something that's for the greater good, so the ends justify the means. So think of Jack Bauer in the TV show 24. He was willing to torture terrorist suspects to save people. He always had a ticking bomb. By the way, that's never really happened in the real world, but nonetheless, on the show it did happen. And so what we mean by the ticking bomb is there's a bomb planted somewhere. It's going to go off unless you convince this terrorist that you've captured to reveal the location of the bomb. And so this is always a common thing that the common example that people will employ to say, look, we need to torture terrorists. We need to do these things because you would do it if there was a situation where there was a ticking bomb and you could save people's lives, then certainly you should torture that suspect. At least that's what the ethical utilitarian would say. Yeah, do it because it produces a greater good. We can get information from them to save a bunch of people. Well, and in practice that really doesn't happen. Torture isn't really effective, and it's, most people would say it's immoral. But nonetheless, this is an officer, an ethical utilitarian who says, whatever I've accomplished, I've taken money from a drug dealer, money and drugs from a drug dealer. Okay, I know that's wrong, but the ends justify it, because this is going to hurt those drug dealers worse than arresting them, taking them to court, and letting the courts decide things. So the utilitarian says, look at what I've accomplished, that justifies what I've done. Ethical relativism is probably the toughest of all of them, because the relativist is going to act ethically according to whatever the circumstances are. So this is much harder to predict than certainly ethical formalism, and even to some extent ethical utilitarianism, because this is really subjective. So it might be that this particular officer would arrest without question a stranger, but if this is their friend, well, that's a circumstance that maybe if their friend was drunk driving, they won't arrest the friend. So, it's really why this is so difficult, ethical relativism, because there could be thousands of different circumstances that influence that officer. So it's not that they're saying I'm doing something for the greater good necessarily, like the utilitarian, but they're saying, well, in these circumstances, because of these circumstances, my attitude toward them, that's going to dictate what kind of ethical decision I make. Maybe I'll rough up this suspect because they're a pedophile and I don't like pedophiles. Other suspects, I won't do anything to them. So again, you can see how this really hinges on some very specific circumstances. Ethical relativism, an officer who practices it is going to be much, much more difficult to understand than an ethical formalist who goes by the book. Or even, as I said, ethical utilitarian, because they're only going to act, bend the rules if they think it's for the greater good. The ethical relativist might do it even when it's not for the greater good. Hey, I might as well take some money from drug dealers. Why not? Everybody else is doing it. So again, those are the specific circumstances that, hey, I'm doing it because everybody else is doing it. I otherwise wouldn't be corrupt. Well, maybe not. But nonetheless, that would be a relativist and their explanation for why they acted.